I'm typing this from a small coffee shop in Portland, Oregon, 3,000 miles from the chaos I left behind in Miami. 6 months ago, I thought family loyalty meant sacrificing everything for the people who shared my DNA. Today, I know better. My name is Rebecca, and this is the story of how my older brother Marcus almost bankrupted me with his entrepreneurial delusions, and how I found the strength to say no. The Golden Child's latest venture. Marcus has always been the family favorite. While I spent my teenage years working part-time jobs to save for college, he charmed his way through high school with promises of future success that never quite materialized. When I graduated summa cum laude from University of Florida with a degree in software engineering, the family dinner conversation centered on Marcus's latest revolutionary app idea. When I landed my first job at a tech startup in Miami, making $75,000 a year, Dad patted Marcus on the shoulder and said, "Your sister's just the reliable one. You're the visionary." I should have seen the warning signs when Marcus showed up at my apartment last October, wearing a designer suit I knew he couldn't afford and carrying a leather portfolio that screamed, "I'm about to ask you for money." "Becca?" He swept me into a hug that felt more like a business transaction. "You look amazing. Success suits you." My studio apartment in Coconut Grove wasn't much, but it was mine. I'd furnished it carefully with IKEA finds and secondhand treasures, creating a space that felt like home after years of cramped dorm rooms and shared apartments with unreliable roommates. "What brings you here, Marcus?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. He settled onto my small couch, spreading documents across my coffee table with the flair of a magician preparing his grand trick. "I wanted to be the first to tell you about VitalSync." The name meant nothing to me, but Marcus's eyes gleamed with the fervor of someone who'd drunk their own marketing Kool-Aid. "It's a revolutionary health and wellness platform," he continued, sliding a glossy brochure toward me. Think Fitbit meets Instagram meets personal trainer, all powered by AI that learns your specific needs. I flipped through the marketing materials, noting the stock photos and vague technical specifications. "Interesting concept. How's the development going?" "That's where you come in." Marcus leaned forward, his smile widening. "I need a CTO, someone brilliant, someone I trust, someone who understands my vision." My stomach tightened. "Marcus, I already have a job. A good job. A job working for someone else's dream," he countered. "This is different. This is family. This is our chance to build something incredible together." He pulled out a contract from his portfolio, already filled out with my name in flowing script. Chief Technology Officer, VitalSync, Inc. The salary line showed $120,000 annually, a significant bump from my current position. "Where's the funding coming from?" I asked, scanning the document. "I've secured initial backing," Marcus said, which I would later learn was Marcus speak for, "I've convinced Mom and Dad to co-sign for a business loan." How much initial backing? Enough to get us through the first year of development. His evasiveness should have been another red flag, but the idea of working with family, of finally being valued for my technical skills rather than dismissed as just the reliable one, clouded my judgment. I signed the contract that night, sealing my fate with a stroke of my pen. The first cracks in paradise. The VitalSync office was a converted warehouse in Wynwood, Miami's Arts District. Marcus had signed a 3-year lease at $8,000 per month, convinced that the trendy location would attract top talent and impress potential investors. The space was beautiful, exposed brick, industrial lighting, floor-to-ceiling windows, and completely unnecessary for a 2-person startup. "Image matters in tech," Marcus explained when I questioned the overhead. "People invest in success, not desperation." My first week as CTO was a whirlwind of optimism and red flags. Marcus had hired a marketing team of 4 people before we had a single line of code. He'd ordered top-of-the-line computers, ergonomic furniture, and an espresso machine that cost more than my monthly rent. "Marcus," I said during our second week, reviewing the expenses he'd asked me to input into our accounting software, "we've spent $47,000, and I'm still the only person actually building the product. You have to spend money to make money, Becca. Trust the process." The process, as it turned out, involved Marcus attending networking events while I worked 16-hour days trying to build an AI-powered health platform with the technical complexity of Facebook, but none of the resources. When I suggested we start with a simpler MVP, minimum viable product, Marcus dismissed the idea. VitalSync isn't just another app, he said, gesturing at the vision board he'd mounted on our conference room wall. We're revolutionizing how people approach wellness. Our users deserve nothing less than perfection. By month 3, I was sleeping at the office more nights than not. The AI integration Marcus promised investors required machine learning expertise I was still acquiring through online courses I took during my lunch breaks. The social media features needed back-end architecture that could scale to millions of users, despite having exactly 0 users to start with. "How's the beta testing going?" Marcus asked one morning, finding me debugging the user authentication system for the 3rd consecutive day. "We don't have a product ready for beta testing," I said without looking up from my screen. "The core functionality isn't stable yet." "But I promised the investors we'd have beta users by next month." This was news to me. "What investors?" Marcus waved dismissively. "The Hernandez Group. They're very interested, but they want to see user engagement data." I'd learned to decode Marcus's language by then. Very interested meant took a meeting. The Hernandez Group was probably 3 guys he'd met at a startup mixer who'd given him their business cards. The family pressure campaign begins. By month 6, our bank account was hemorrhaging money faster than I could track. The marketing team Marcus had hired produced glossy promotional materials for a product that didn't exist. Our social media accounts posted daily updates about VitalSync's revolutionary features that were still theoretical concepts in my development backlog. When I suggested reducing expenses by letting go of the marketing team and finding a smaller office space, Marcus looked at me like I'd suggested we set the computers on fire. "You don't understand business, Becca. Marketing is investment, not expense. Those social media followers are future customers." "We have 847 followers, and half of them are bots," I said, pulling up the analytics. "Meanwhile, we're burning through $23,000 a month in overhead." That's where phase 2 comes in. Marcus pulled out another contract, this one thicker than the original CTO agreement. I've structured a friends and family funding round. Low pressure, flexible terms, people who believe in us. The contract outlined a $200,000 investment from family members and close friends, with Marcus and me as the primary borrowers. My name was already filled in as co-signer for the full amount. "Marcus, I can't guarantee $200,000. "You're not guaranteeing anything. We're giving them equity in exchange for belief in our vision." His eyes gleamed with the fervor of someone who'd spent too much time reading startup success stories and not enough time looking at failure statistics. I studied the fine print, my software engineering training having taught me to always read the documentation thoroughly. Buried in Section 12 was the real truth. If VitalSync failed to turn a profit within 18 months, the investors could demand full repayment of their initial investment. "This isn't equity investment, Marcus. This is a loan with extra steps." "Details, Becca. The important thing is that we're keeping this in the family. People who want us to succeed." The family pressure began that weekend at Sunday dinner at our parents' house in Coral Gables. Mom had prepared her famous arroz con pollo, and the dining room buzzed with extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends who'd been hearing about VitalSync for months. "Rebecca, honey?" Aunt Carmen said, squeezing my hand as we sat down to eat. "Marcus told us about the investment opportunity. It sounds so exciting." Uncle Tony nodded enthusiastically. "I've been looking for somewhere to put my retirement savings, something with real growth potential." My stomach dropped. Marcus had positioned VitalSync not as a high-risk startup investment, but as a sure thing backed by his brilliant engineer sister. I watched him hold court at the head of the table, describing our rapid user acquisition and revolutionary AI algorithms, while I sat silent, knowing that our user base was still essentially 0, and our AI was barely sophisticated enough to count daily steps. "The friends and family round closes next week," Marcus announced, raising his wine glass. "Last chance to get in at ground floor pricing before we go to institutional investors. There were no institutional investors. There was no ground floor. There was only my brother's delusion and my family's trust in his version of reality. After dinner, Dad pulled me aside. "I'm proud of you for supporting your brother," he said. "Mom and I are putting in $15,000. It's most of our emergency fund, but family invests in family." The weight of their trust settled on my shoulders like a lead blanket. How could I tell them that VitalSync was a fantasy? That Marcus had spent months burning through money on image and marketing while I struggled alone to build something that might never work? "Dad," I started, but he was already walking away, calling over his shoulder about getting the paperwork to Marcus by Tuesday. The point of no return. The friends and family funding round closed with $187,000 in commitments. My parents contributed $15,000. Aunt Carmen and Uncle Tony each put in $10,000. My grandmother, who I adored, contributed $8,000 from the savings account she'd built nickeling and diming since she immigrated from Cuba in 1962. Marcus's college roommate Jake invested $25,000 he'd saved for a down payment on his first house. As co-signer on the investment agreement, I was legally responsible for every penny. Marcus celebrated by upgrading our office furniture and hiring 2 additional marketing specialists. When I protested, he reminded me that we now had fiduciary responsibility to our investors. "They're expecting aggressive growth, Becca. We can't disappoint family." The product development continued at a glacial pace, hampered by the technical complexity Marcus had insisted upon and my increasingly fragmented attention. During the day, I coded frantically, trying to build features Marcus promised investors. During the evening, I attended networking events and pitch sessions where Marcus introduced me as his technical co-founder, and I smiled while he made claims about our capabilities that bore little resemblance to reality. VitalSync's AI can predict health issues before they manifest, he told a room full of potential partners at a healthcare innovation summit. Our beta users are seeing 40% improvement in their wellness metrics. We had 12 beta users, all of whom were Marcus's friends, testing a barely functional prototype that crashed whenever they tried to input data for more than 3 consecutive days. The stress began affecting my health. I developed insomnia, surviving on coffee and the sheer terror of disappointing my grandmother, who'd invested her life savings in my brother's dream. My apartment became a secondary office where I worked until 3 a.m., then caught a few hours of sleep before returning to the Wynwood warehouse. Marcus, meanwhile, seemed energized by the pressure. He started wearing expensive suits and driving a leased BMW, explaining that successful founders need to look the part for investor meetings. "What investor meetings?" I asked one morning, finding him in the office at 11 a.m. after I'd been coding since 6 a.m. "The Series A round is heating up," he said vaguely. "I'm meeting with some very interested VCs next week." There was no Series A round. I knew this because I was the one monitoring our bank account, which showed a balance that decreased daily but never increased. Our monthly expenses now exceeded $30,000, while our revenue remained stubbornly fixed at 0. The house of cards collapses. The beginning of the end came on a Tuesday morning in March. I arrived at the office to find an eviction notice taped to our door. We were 3 months behind on rent, despite Marcus's assurances that he'd been handling the business side while I focused on development. Inside, Marcus sat at his desk, head in his hands, surrounded by past due notices and threatening letters from creditors. The sleek office that had once symbolized our startup success now felt like a museum of failure. "How bad is it?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Marcus looked up, and for the first time since we'd started VitalSync, his salesman confidence had cracked. "We're out of money, Becca. Completely out." I pulled up our accounting software, reviewing the financial carnage with the methodical horror of a forensic accountant. Marcus had spent the investment money on everything except product development, marketing campaigns that generated no leads, office furniture that looked impressive but served no function, travel expenses for conferences that produced no partnerships, and his own salary, which he'd quietly increased to $8,000 per month without telling me. "The investors are asking questions," Marcus continued. "Uncle Tony called yesterday wanting to know when we're launching publicly. Grandmother keeps asking when she'll see her first dividend check." My hands shook as I scrolled through the expenses. 6 months of my family's money burned through on Marcus's delusions of startup grandeur, while I'd worked myself to the brink of exhaustion trying to build his impossible dream. "We need to tell them," I said. "We need to tell them what really happened." "We need to pivot." Marcus countered, his salesman persona reasserting itself. "I've been researching alternative funding sources. There's a small business loan we could qualify for, maybe another friends and family round." "With what collateral and what product?" I gestured at my computer screen, where months of code represented a partially functional app that crashed under any real-world usage. "VitalSync doesn't work, Marcus. It's never going to work. Not the way you promised." "You're giving up too easily. Every successful startup goes through rough patches." I stared at my brother, this person I'd trusted with my career and my family's life savings, and realized he genuinely believed his own mythology. In Marcus's mind, VitalSync's failure wasn't the result of poor planning, unrealistic expectations, and financial mismanagement. It was just a temporary setback on the inevitable path to success. That night, I sat in my apartment reviewing the legal documents I'd signed. As co-signer on the investment agreements, I was personally liable for the full $187,000. My current salary, even if I could find another job immediately, would require years to repay what my family had lost. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake, Marcus's college roommate. "Hey, Becca. Any updates on the VitalSync launch? I'm getting married next year and was hoping to see some returns by then for the wedding budget." I stared at the message, imagining Jake's wedding funded by money that no longer existed, spent on marketing materials for a product that would never see the market. The weight of my family's trust, my grandmother's life savings, my own financial ruin. It all settled in my chest like a physical pain. That's when I made the decision that would save my life. The Great Escape Plan. I spent the next week researching bankruptcy law, personal liability protections, and job opportunities outside of Florida. What I discovered was sobering. As co-signer on VitalSync's debts, I could be held personally responsible for every penny we owed, including the investor money, unpaid rent, and various business loans Marcus had secured using both our names. However, I also learned that certain states offered better protection for individuals caught in business partnership disputes. Oregon, specifically, had laws that could help me demonstrate that I'd been misled about the company's financial status and my role in its obligations. More importantly, Oregon had a thriving tech scene and several companies actively recruiting senior software engineers. I began applying for jobs in Portland, Seattle, and San Francisco, crafting a resume that highlighted my technical skills while diplomatically explaining my startup experience. During video interviews, I was honest about VitalSync's failure while emphasizing the valuable lessons I'd learned about product development, team management, and the importance of sustainable business practices. The response was better than I'd hoped. Despite the startup failure, my coding skills were strong, and the experience of building a complex application from scratch, even an unsuccessful one, demonstrated capabilities that employers valued. Innovate Solutions, a mid-sized software company in Portland, offered me a senior developer position at $95,000 annually, with the possibility of remote work during the transition period. The hiring manager, Sarah Chen, had founded her own failed startup 5 years earlier and understood the difference between personal failure and being exploited by a business partner. Failed startups teach you things that successful companies can't, she told me during our final interview. You learn resourcefulness, you learn to build with limited resources, and you learn to recognize red flags that prevent future disasters. While I secretly interviewed and planned my escape, Marcus continued living in denial. He scheduled meetings with potential investors who didn't exist, developed marketing strategies for a product that didn't work, and made increasingly desperate promises to our family members about imminent breakthroughs. The pivot to B2B sales is going to change everything, he announced one morning, showing me slides for a presentation he'd never give to partners who had no interest in meeting with us. I nodded and continued updating my resume. The hardest part was keeping my plans secret from my family. During Sunday dinners, I listened to my parents discuss their excitement about VitalSync's upcoming launch, while knowing that their $15,000 was gone forever. I watched my grandmother show her friends articles Marcus had published on LinkedIn about entrepreneurial persistence, while knowing that her $8,000 investment had been spent on office furniture we were about to lose to creditors. But I also knew that telling them the truth before I had a plan would only create chaos without solution. If I was going to save myself, I needed to do it strategically. The final confrontation. On my last day at VitalSync, I arrived at the office early to back up my code and gather my personal belongings. Marcus found me packing my laptop bag and assumed I was taking work home as usual. "Working late again?" he asked. "I admire your dedication, Becca. It's that kind of commitment that's going to make VitalSync a success." I looked at my brother. This person who'd convinced our entire family to invest their savings in his delusion, who'd signed my name to financial obligations I couldn't meet, who still believed that success was just one more pivot away, and felt a mixture of pity and rage that surprised me with its intensity. "Marcus," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system, "I've accepted a position with another company. I'm moving to Portland next week." His face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and anger in rapid succession. "You can't leave. We're partners. We have obligations." "You have obligations. I was never a real partner, just free labor with a fancy title." "That's not true. You're overreacting because we hit a rough patch." I pulled out a folder I'd prepared, filled with printouts of every financial transaction, every misleading statement to investors, every promise he'd made that we both knew he couldn't keep. "This isn't a rough patch, Marcus. This is fraud. You told our family that VitalSync was a viable business. You signed my name to agreements without my full understanding of the terms. You spent their money on everything except the product you promised to build." Marcus's face flushed red. "I've been working just as hard as you, building relationships, securing funding, developing partnerships. Show me one partnership that's generated revenue. Show me one piece of funding that isn't borrowed from family members who trust us." The silence stretched between us, broken only by the hum of computers that would soon be repossessed. "I could sue you for abandonment of fiduciary duty," Marcus finally said. "You signed contracts. You made commitments." "Go ahead," I replied, shouldering my bag. "My lawyer will be interested in your documentation of how you misrepresented VitalSync's finances to both me and our investors." This was a bluff. I couldn't afford a lawyer yet, but Marcus didn't need to know that. I walked toward the door, then turned back one last time. "For what it's worth, Marcus, I hope you figure out how to make this right with our family. But I won't go down with your ship." Life after the escape. My first month in Portland felt like waking up from a fever dream. I found a small apartment in the Alberta Arts District, furnished it slowly with thrift store finds and budget purchases, and marveled at the simple pleasure of living within my means. The work at Innovate Solutions was challenging but manageable, building e-commerce platforms for small businesses, nothing that required the impossible AI integration Marcus had demanded. My colleagues were supportive and professional, offering technical guidance without the emotional manipulation I'd grown accustomed to. Most importantly, my paycheck was mine. No family obligations, no investor expectations, no brother spending my earnings on office furniture and luxury cars. For the first time in years, I was building something sustainable. The legal fallout from VitalSync took months to resolve. Marcus had signed personal guarantees for most of our business debts, and as the company's CEO, he bore primary responsibility for the mismanagement. My status as a co-signer created some complications, but my documentation of Marcus's misrepresentation of the company's finances helped establish that I'd been deceived about the nature of our obligations. The family relationships were more complicated. Uncle Tony stopped speaking to me entirely, convinced that I'd abandoned the family business out of selfishness. Aunt Carmen sent me disappointed text messages about responsibility and commitment. My parents struggled to understand how their children could have such different versions of what had happened with VitalSync. But my grandmother surprised me. 3 weeks after I moved to Portland, she called me on a Tuesday evening. "Mija," she said. her voice carrying the wisdom of 8 decades. "I've been thinking about that business with your brother." I braced myself for another lecture about family loyalty. You know, when I came to this country, I had people who made promises they couldn't keep, people who spent my money and called it investment. You did the right thing getting away from that. I started crying, months of stress and guilt finally finding release. "Your brother, he has a good heart but a weak mind for business. He believes his own stories too much. But you have sense. You build real things." My grandmother had lost $8,000 in VitalSync's collapse, but she understood something that the rest of my family couldn't grasp. There's a difference between giving up and recognizing when you're being exploited. Building something real. 6 months into my Portland life, I received an unexpected email from Jake, Marcus's college roommate, who'd invested $25,000 in VitalSync. I expected anger, threats, demands for repayment. Instead, I found curiosity. "Hey, Becca," his message read. "I hope you're doing well in Portland. Marcus told me about the company closing down, and I wanted to reach out. I'm not mad about the money. Startup investments are always risky. But I am curious about what you learned from the experience. I'm working on a project of my own and could use some perspective from someone who's been through the startup ringer." Jake's project was a simple mobile app for tracking community garden participation. Nothing revolutionary, nothing that promised to disrupt entire industries. Just a useful tool for people who wanted to coordinate their neighborhood gardening efforts. "I keep thinking about scope creep," Jake said during our video call. "Every time I add a feature, I remember VitalSync promising to solve every wellness problem simultaneously." I laughed, recognizing the hard-won wisdom in his concern. Start small. Solve one problem well. Growth comes from users, not from promises. Over the following months, I began consulting with Jake on his project during evenings and weekends. It felt good to build something modest and achievable, to set realistic expectations and meet them consistently. The app launched 8 months later with 200 beta users from Portland's community gardening network. Nothing fancy, nothing revolutionary, just a tool that worked as advertised. Jake's total development cost was under $8,000, mostly for server hosting and app store fees. "We'll never be the next Facebook," Jake told me during our launch celebration, "but we'll never be the next VitalSync either." The Marcus update. A year after my escape to Portland, Marcus finally contacted me directly, not through family intermediaries or guilt-inducing voicemails, but a simple text message, "Can we talk?" We met via video call on a Sunday afternoon. Marcus looked older, more tired, but also somehow clearer than he'd been during our VitalSync days. The manic entrepreneurial energy had been replaced by something that looked like humility. "I've been working as a sales manager for a medical device company," he said. "Boring stuff. No disruption, no revolution, just selling equipment to hospitals." "How do you like it?" "It's stable. I get a paycheck every 2 weeks, and I'm not constantly terrified that I'm about to disappoint everyone I care about." He paused. "I've been paying back the family investments, $50 a month to everyone. It'll take forever, but it's something." I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that Marcus had found stability, sadness that it had taken financial devastation to get him there. "I owe you an apology," Marcus continued. "I convinced myself that I was building something amazing, but really I was just scared of having a normal job like everyone else. I made you responsible for my fantasy, and that wasn't fair." "Thank you for saying that." "Are you happy in Portland?" I thought about my small apartment, my manageable job, my quiet evenings reading technical blogs instead of frantically coding impossible features. "I'm building something real here, not just work stuff. A real life. It's smaller than what we dreamed about with VitalSync, but it's mine." Lessons from the ashes. These days, I get occasional emails from people who've heard my story secondhand, usually through Jake or Sarah Chen, my boss at Innovate Solutions. They're often in situations similar to where I was 2 years ago. Trapped in family businesses that exploit their skills, committed to ventures that prioritize image over substance, struggling with the guilt of wanting to prioritize their own financial stability over family expectations. My advice is always the same. Family loyalty shouldn't require financial suicide. Real love wants you to succeed, not to sacrifice yourself for someone else's dreams. I've also learned to recognize the warning signs that I missed with VitalSync. Business plans that prioritize marketing over product development, partners who spend more time networking than working, family members who pressure you to invest based on relationships rather than realistic projections, anyone who discourages you from reading contracts thoroughly or seeking independent legal advice. Most importantly, I've learned that saying no to family isn't betrayal, it's boundaries. Healthy families want their members to make sustainable choices, even when those choices disappoint them temporarily. Jake's gardening app now has 2,000 active users across the Pacific Northwest. It generates enough revenue to cover its costs and provide him with a small side income. More importantly, it works as advertised, helps real people solve real problems, and never promises more than it can deliver. My work at Innovate Solutions has evolved into a senior architect role, designing software systems that prioritize reliability over revolution. Our clients are small businesses who need practical solutions, not paradigm-shifting disruption. It's satisfying work that pays well and ends at 5 p.m. most days. The view from here. Last month, I bought my first house, a small craftsman bungalow in Portland's Sellwood neighborhood. The mortgage is manageable, the commute to work is 15 minutes by bike, and the backyard has space for a vegetable garden that I'm planning with advice from Jake's app users. As I write this, rain patters against my office window while I work on a side project. Nothing grand, just a simple tool to help freelance developers track their time and invoice clients efficiently. It'll probably make a few $100s in revenue if I'm lucky. It'll never revolutionize anything or disrupt any industries, but it will work as advertised. It will solve a real problem for real people, and it will be built with realistic expectations, sustainable practices, and honest relationships with users who deserve better than empty promises wrapped in attractive marketing. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed in Miami, if I'd continued trying to build Marcus's impossible dream while our family's savings evaporated. I think about the insomnia, the constant anxiety, the feeling that I was always one failed feature away from disappointing everyone I loved. Then I look around my small house, at the books on my shelves, and the bicycle in my hallway, and the coffee cup that I bought because I liked it, rather than because it projected the right entrepreneurial image. This life isn't glamorous or revolutionary or destined for TechCrunch headlines, but it's real, it's sustainable, and it's mine. And sometimes, that's not just enough. It's everything. TLDR, my brother convinced me to quit my stable tech job to be CTO of his startup, using my name to secure $187,000 in investments from our family and friends. When the company failed due to his mismanagement and unrealistic expectations, I moved across the country to escape the financial and emotional wreckage. 2 years later, I have a stable career, healthy boundaries, and the hard-won knowledge that family loyalty shouldn't require financial suicide. Update, 6 months later, Jake's gardening app was acquired by a larger agricultural technology company for a modest but life-changing sum. Marcus completed his family repayment plan ahead of schedule and was promoted to regional sales director. My grandmother started her own small business selling traditional Cuban pastries and asked me to build her a simple website for online orders. Some stories don't end with dramatic confrontations or complete family reconciliation, but with the quiet satisfaction of people figuring out how to build sustainable, honest relationships with each other. Is it better to maintain family peace at the cost of your own financial stability, or to prioritize your own well-being even when it disappoints people you love? I used to think family always came first, but now I know that real family wants you to succeed on terms that don't destroy your future.